Imagine a mind untouched by story. No memories, no inherited truths. Only a quiet surface, a blank page waiting for the ink of experience. This was John Locke's daring beginning, a man who lived through storms of kings and revolutions, yet trusted the whisper of observation more than the roar of authority. His idea would not simply reshape philosophy. It would unsettle monarchs, liberate minds, and give birth to a new understanding of freedom. Today, we step into the candlelit rooms, the crowded taverns, the secret councils, and the restless laboratories of a man whose thought became a turning point in history. The England into which Locke was born was an unsettled world, trembling with uncertainty. Cromwell's armies marched across fields still wet from rain. Parliament rose against the crown, and the execution of a king left an entire nation haunted by the question of who should rule and by what right. Faith fractured into rival altars, Catholics, Anglicans, and Protestants each claiming to speak for truth. But beneath the noise, a quieter revolution was growing, a movement among natural philosophers who traded the certainties of ancient books for the fragile, luminous power of observation. This scientific awakening, still young, still doubted, offered a new path. Not obedience to authority, but fidelity to experience. Into this trembling century, Locke opened his eyes. Locke's childhood in a Puritan household gave him discipline and earnestness, but his mind was restless, reaching. At Westminster School, he mastered the classics. At Oxford, he entered a world where tradition still pressed heavily on thought. Aristotle ruled the lecture halls. Scholastic debates circled endlessly, as if the old answers had no need for the new world rising outside. But Locke felt the future knocking. In quiet corners of Oxford, experiments hissed, bubbles rose, and air pumps wheezed like lungs discovering breath. There, he encountered Robert Boyle, patient, meticulous, committed to testing what others merely asserted. He met the physician Thomas Sydenham, who approached medicine not through ancient theory, but through careful attention to symptoms, patterns, and recovery. Here, Locke learned a truth that would become the foundation of his philosophy. Knowledge is not inherited, it is observed, gathered, shaped, and tested. The mind is not a vault of secrets. It is an instrument. This realization, quiet at first, would one day echo across continents. In 1666, a simple gesture altered the course of Locke's life. A colleague asked him to deliver a medicinal treatment to a powerful and ambitious nobleman, Sir Anthony Ashley Cooper. Locke went politely, performed the task with calm precision, and expected to return to his studies. Instead, Ashley recognized in him a mind both practical and penetrating. He invited Locke into his household, not merely as a physician, but as an advisor, companion, and eventually one of his most trusted confidants. Exeter House in London became Locke's new world. There, amid political intrigue and strategy, he drafted constitutions, debated policy, and analyzed trade, economics, and colonial affairs. When Ashley's health failed, it was Locke who performed the dangerous operation that saved his life, a moment that sealed their bond and anchored Locke deeply within the structures of England's emerging political realignments. Locke was no longer an observer of history. He had stepped into its machinery. Yet even in the turbulence of politics, Locke's philosophical curiosity never dimmed. At Exeter House, he hosted intimate gatherings of friends, scientists, theologians, travelers, skeptics. They debated religion, ethics, human nature. But discussion after discussion fell into confusion. One evening, Locke interrupted gently. Before we attempt to answer the greatest questions, ought we not inquire how the mind comes to possess ideas at all? This question, simple, sharp, shifted the room. That night, Locke began scribbling notes that would become an essay concerning human understanding. He would carry those notes with him through exile, illness, and political upheaval, refining them for nearly 2 decades. A lifetime of observation pressed slowly toward its masterpiece. As tensions rose between the monarchy and those who favored constitutional restraint, Ashley became a symbol of opposition, and Locke, by association, found himself under threat. When Charles II sought to crush dissent, Locke slipped quietly into Holland, leaving behind his position at Oxford and risking arrest should he return. Exile became his refuge. In Amsterdam's narrow streets and Leiden's quiet libraries, he found the solitude to think. There he completed the essay, wrote his letters on toleration, and stood quietly but firmly with those working toward a revolution in England. When the glorious revolution of 1688 brought William and Mary to the throne and curbed the absolute power of kings, Locke returned home not as a fugitive, but as a contributor to the very ideas that had shaped the uprising. The essay opens with a declaration that must have struck contemporaries like a lightning bolt. There are no innate ideas, no divine inscriptions, no knowledge woven into the soul at birth. No truths delivered ready-made. Instead, Locke claimed, the mind begins as tabula rasa, an unwritten page. Upon this page, experience makes its marks. Sensation, the world entering through the senses. Reflection, the mind's ability to examine, combine, and interpret. These two, and nothing more, generate the full architecture of human understanding. This was not merely a theory about psychology. It was a gentle rebellion. If experience is the source of knowledge, then learning belongs to all. Reason becomes a shared inheritance. Authority loses its monopoly on truth. The blank slate was a quiet, radical tool. Locke's humility of mind was perhaps his most revolutionary quality. He insisted not only on understanding how ideas arise, but on recognizing the boundaries of human knowledge. Some questions, he warned, stretch beyond the reach of our faculties. When we mistake obscurity for profundity or complexity for truth, we fall into confusion. True wisdom begins where the mind recognizes its limits. This gentle acceptance, not defeat, but clarity, became one of the Enlightenment's guiding lights. Alongside his philosophy of mind, Locke was quietly crafting the architecture of a new political order. In the 2 treatises of government, he argued, human beings are born free. They possess natural rights, life, liberty, property, not granted by rulers, but grounded in their very nature. Governments exist only to protect these rights, and when they fail or violate them, people may resist, even overthrow their governors. He separated church from state, insisting that belief cannot be forced, and that the soul is beyond the jurisdiction of the magistrate. His writings circulated across oceans and borders, seeds carried on the winds of revolution. In his later years, Locke found a quiet sanctuary at Oates, the home of Francis and Damaris Masham. There, surrounded by gardens and long walks, he revised the essay, wrote on education, and remained a careful advisor to the Board of Trade. His health declined, but his mind remained clear, steady as a clock, patient as a scribe of experience. He passed away in 1704, leaving a world increasingly shaped by the ideas he had tended with such care. Today, every time we speak of rights that cannot be taken, of governments that must justify their power, of conscience that must remain free, we echo the language Locke helped carve into the modern world. From his blank slate emerged a philosophy that shaped constitutions, revolutions, and the ordinary dignity of individual judgment. John Locke did not seek to dominate minds. He sought to free them, and in doing so, he left us with one of history's most enduring gifts, a reminder that the mind begins in openness, grows through experience, and finds its strength in the quiet courage to think for itself.